This is 88.9 FM, WOJB Reserve from the Couteret on the web, WOJB.org. Coming up at 9 o'clock, Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman, and the program. After 10 o'clock, of course, we're bringing you alternative radio twice weekly on WOJB, Sundays at 10 and Monday, again at 10, a rebroadcast of the program, which is today. Chris Hedges speaking about Captain Ahab and U.S. Empire, corporate coup d'etat. And what he speaks about today is, well, a relentless hunger for profits, control of oil and other resources, and the U.S. garrisoning of the globe with military bases, and an arrogant disregard for the environment, which he says puts the nation on a suicidal path, the same suicidal path as Captain Ahab. And he says, a well-disciplined media and intellectual class rarely challenge the embedded assumptions, and Chris Hedges, and you'll hear him this morning, say that we continue to ignore all warnings as to the destruction we are wreaking on the planet. The great white whale, Ahab, and U.S. empire, and climate change, and how we are ignoring all warnings. Well, not all have been ignoring the warnings. And one of those who is sounding the alarm is Guy McPherson, an internationally recognized speaker, award-winning scientist, a leading authority on abrupt climate change leading to near-term human extinction. May I repeat that? Near-term human extinction. Guy McPherson, Professor Emeritus of the University of Arizona, where he taught and conducted research for 20 years, and he's giving a presentation this evening at 6:30 at the Martin Hanson Theater, the Great Lakes Visitors Center, west of Ashland. The presentation is free. It's open to the public, and he joins me now. Guy McPherson, I'm grateful to have you on the air. Thank you.
It's my pleasure, Eric.
You retired. You left academia. How many years ago now?
I left active service a little over 9 years ago in May of 2009.
9 years ago. It recalls a comment that I heard you say once when you believed that we perhaps had a decade of human existence on the planet, and you said that it would not be 9 years, 364 good days and one bad one, that we would be in a precipitous decline toward that ending of human life on the planet. You've shortened that, or have you? Have you shortened the length of time you believe that humans have on the planet, given what we're doing to it?
You know, when I first started writing about abrupt climate change nearly a dozen years ago, I was using the age-old canard of 2100, that we'll have humans on the planet until 2100. Then further investigation of the evidence indicated that 2050, and then I said in the 2030s, and then I said by 2030, and now the evidence is compelling enough that I say the last human being will depart the planet in 2025. So the evidence keeps accumulating, and none of it is ever good. So that's what leads me to the conclusion of the near-term human extinction getting closer with every passing year as the evidence accumulates.
And some of that evidence, it seems to be, well, you say it, I mean, it's growing. I mean, California's in flames this past weekend. The skies over, well, for Lake Superior and this whole region, smoke from the fires from the west, and, Canada, and there is, well, as they say out in California, the fire season is all year long now.
That's right. And, I now live in western Belize, and 25 years ago, the rainy season was 10 months out of the year. And until a couple of years ago, it was 6 months out of the year. 6 months rainy season, 6 months dry season. And the rainy season is 3 months delayed this year, so it looks like we'll have maybe a 3-month rainy season. That hasn't happened, by the way, until last year for the last 1,000 years, approximately coincident with the collapse of the Mayan civilization. So the signs are everywhere, as you indicated. There's flooding all over the globe. The planet is literally on fire. There's huge slumps of what used to be permafrost sliding down mountains throughout Siberia and in the northern parts of the world. And the list goes on. And finally, it's not so much the refereed journal literature science that points us to our demise. It's the ability to just look around and see what's happening to habitat for our species already, see what's happening as we drive to extinction, 5 out of 6 mammals on the planet, and the list just goes on. And apparently there's no stopping this runaway train, certainly not in time.
Well, as you say, we're driving other creatures to extinction, and somehow we have had the hubris to believe that not us.
Right, as if you can foul your own nest indefinitely and not get a little poop on your own feathers. Come on, folks.
A number of years ago, Guy McPherson, it was Bill McKibben and others, started the organization 350.org, to draw attention to the fact that we've increased the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, and if we get beyond 350, we're in deep trouble. We're now at 410 or 11 or something like that.
Yeah, and clearly we're in deep trouble. If 350 was the absolute upper limit, James Hansen pointed out in 1988 to Congress. And really, he said we should be around 280 to 320. And at the time, we were already over 350. And it's clear at this point that there's no going back to 350 or anything close to it. In fact, the temperature associated with the current level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is locked in for at least the next 1,000 years. So, and by the way, Bill McKibben and 350.org knew that, based on a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in February 2009, before they launched their first public movement. So there's been a lot going on for a long time. It was 35 years ago. Al Gore and Carl Sagan were on the floor of Congress warning people of the kinds of things we're seeing today if we don't do something differently. That was 1983.
And of course, we haven't done much differently.
No, and now we find ourselves in a real paradox. We know that civilization itself, based on the laws of thermodynamics, is a heat engine, and because of global dimming, we know that if we turn off the heat engine known as civilization, the planet will heat up even faster because of a phenomenon called global dimming. And so it's a real paradox. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, and I don't see us doing much, and we haven't done much for a long time. It's small wonder reality caught up with us.
And, I'm noting the headline of an article, Climate Change is the Inevitable Consequence of Capitalist Privatization, and whatever the faults, what is the solution? Your talk tonight at the Northern Great Lakes Visitor Center titled Abrupt Climate Change. We'll talk about what that means, but finding peace and purpose in urgent times. If we don't have a solution for the problem, perhaps you seem to be suggesting there may be a way to live, or as we die with it, a way to go out gently. Bill McKibben once said, it's not a matter of when, it's just how soft might we be able to make the landing.
That's right, and I think that particularly applies at the personal level, not so much at the societal level. I think at the societal level, we have one foot over the cliff and the other foot on a banana peel, and we're going down. So at the level of individuals, how do we respond? How do we act? And I've been recommending for several years that we act as if we're in hospice, as if we're in planetary hospice, and sort of treat each other with respect and finish the conversations we never had, finish the relationships that have gone south, reach closure with the people in our lives. There are many things we can do as individuals in light of our imminent demise, and I would suggest we get started on those things.
And let's talk about some of the things we might start on. But when we think about this, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that, it should be at 280 or something, as James Hansen said, the organization 350.org, at least saying, well, this may help inform people about what's The problem is we're at 410 or 11 or whatever and better, and human beings have never breathed air like that, you know. It's a whole new game, isn't it?
That's right. And, you know, the deniers point out that we're doing fine. Right, we're at 410, and that means plants can grow even better because it's easier for them to capture the carbon dioxide and all this other nonsense. And if it were just carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and it were not a greenhouse gas, that would be one thing. But that's not the case. We know a lot about greenhouse gases and about climate science, in large part because of James Hansen and his work back in the 80s and 90s and continuing today. So now we know that it's not just one thing that we're changing. It's not just carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's the knock-on effects from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere of things like global average temperature. So we find ourselves in a serious situation, and I don't see much of the response coming from governments and corporate media focused on even pointing out that we're in the midst of a planetary emergency, much less informing people what they might do as individuals, how they might respond.
Yeah. Well, there's many, carbon dioxide, a climate-changing problem, but there's also methane. I recall Gordon Pearson several years ago, a couple of years ago in any case, I had a conversation with a scientist from Santa Barbara, University of California, Santa Barbara, talking about the clathrate gun, you know, the possible explosion of methane out of the ocean and how quickly things can change and have changed in the past. You know, wasn't much beyond decades when there have been some serious climate shifts. And there are these problems like the possible or likely release of methane from the ocean bottom coming bursting out, and whoops, you know, that abrupt climate change you talk about could be very abrupt.
Absolutely. And Natalia Shukova and her research team for years, for nearly a decade, have been pointing out the risks associated with massive emissions of methane in the Arctic Ocean, and they've been disparaged by others in the scientific community, most notably Gavin Schmidt, who took over James Hansen's position in the federal government. And yet they published a paper, Natalia Shukova and her research team published a paper in Nature Communications last year indicating that, sure enough, exactly that kind of release of methane is to be expected based on the historical evidence. And another research team comprised of a dozen different authors reached the same conclusion in a paper published within a month of that paper published in August by Shukova and her team. So the evidence continues to accumulate that such an abrupt release of methane from the Arctic Ocean has happened in the past and therefore is likely to happen in the not too distant future. And we just need one such burst and it's game over for this set of living arrangements, and therefore, because of the absence of global dimming that will result, therefore habitat for humans on Earth.
That set of living arrangements, that's an interesting way of putting it, isn't it? The way we live is going to change.
That's right. And
arrangement. Yeah.
You know, I use that term because when I use the word civilization, it confuses people. And for several months, I was pointing to the work of Tim Garrett at the University of Utah, indicating that only collapse of civilization stops profound emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And so people ask me, well, what do you mean by that? What does Garrett mean by collapse of civilization? And I had assumed that he meant no fuel at the filling stations, no food at the grocery stores, no water coming out of the municipal taps, and people took issue with that. So I wrote to him directly and asked him what he meant without feeding him a leading question, and he responded with just that. He said, you know, exactly what I've been saying. No fuel at the filling stations, no food at the grocery stores, and no water coming out of the municipal taps. And so when I talk about the collapse of civilization, when I talk about no civilization, That's what I'm talking about, is the ability to store grains and therefore get us through the hard times and all that's associated with that, including the bread, not just the circuses, but the bread associated with this and all other previous civilizations.
Not just the circuses.
Right.
I'm speaking with Dr. Guy McPherson, who is giving a presentation this evening, tonight, 6:30 at the Martin Hanson Theater at the Northern Great Lakes Visitors Center, just west of Ashland on US Highway 2. It's free and open to the public. They talk abrupt climate change, finding peace and purpose in urgent times. Guy McPherson, some have seen the film, for example, what was the film, 2012 or something, or The Day After, trying to recall the title of that one, but where this abrupt climate change happens so abruptly that people have almost no time to respond, and many are rushing to find themselves away from the freezing northern latitudes if they can. And occasionally, and I've seen that film, occasionally I will recall and think, it kind of looks like this, doesn't it, with fires and the possibility of the end of the Gulf Stream coming to a stop, which has happened in the past.
Right, and that has happened a half a dozen times in planetary history that we know about. And a report about that very phenomenon by Schwartz and Randall, submitted to the Pentagon in 2002, formed the basis for that film, The Day After Tomorrow. And the film came out, I believe, in 2003 or 2004, and it described a very, very rapid change in weather as a result of a reversal of the Gulf Stream. Of course, it was a Hollywood film, so it was a little over the top, to say the least. But it makes the point very clearly that we can, and the Earth has experienced very abrupt changes in climate in the past because of phenomena that we're only beginning to understand now.
I recall in what was I thought a very good book, Bill Bryson, I think it was a brief history of just about everything, describes how at one time there was huge carbon dumped into the atmosphere, and he said, but the Earth recovered. It took 350,000 years to recover.
Right. I was looking for that book in a bookstore in Portland, Oregon, and I said, I'm looking for the book, A Brief History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson. And they couldn't find it, and finally one of the people working in the bookstore said, oh, it's not a brief history, it's a short history. And then we found it right away. What a wonderful book.
Yeah, the Earth recovers. Took 350,000 years.
Well, and we're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction on planet Earth, and in the wake of the previous 5, several million years were required for the planet to have an abundant, flourishing, verdant look to it again, with lots and lots of different species. So I don't see why this version would be any different. We're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction. And if the planet recovers at all, and that's not entirely certain, by the way, if it does, then it will take millions of years before we have a flourishing, rich biological diversity as the planet has had for millions of years since the 5th mass extinction on Earth.
Guy McPherson described, if that term might be new to some, the sixth great extinction, it is being commonly used among many scientists today. Describe it as you understand it.
Yeah, there have been 5 mass extinctions. A mass extinction event means that at least 50% of the species on Earth go extinct. We're now in the midst of the 6th mass extinction. 3 of them result from abrupt increases in global average temperature. 3 of them resulted from abrupt decreases in global average temperature. And the worst of them are the increases in temperature. That's when we experience the most loss of life on Earth. And the worst of them all was the Permian-Triassic extinction event some 252 million years ago that caused the extinction of more than 90% of the species on the planet. This time, compared to the post-Permian event, this time we are pouring greenhouse gases into the atmosphere about 10 times faster than occurred then. So it's no surprise to me that the extinction rate is about 10 times faster than it was then, 252 million years ago, and that we should expect for our species to disappear pretty soon, along with all other essentially all other multicellular life on Earth, because of the inability to adapt to such profoundly rapid changes in our own environment.
The inability to adapt. Now, I think often about as temperatures rise, and it's just about sea levels rising. If the sea level rises X amount, you probably know the number. I mean, suddenly masses of people are going to need to relocate. I mean, forgetting whatever else might be going on during that rise in sea levels, a lot of people, if nothing else were occurring, just the sea levels rose.
That's right, and that's
just a lot of people have to move.
That's one of a handful of phenomena that we can point to as very, very disruptive. For example, terrestrial permafrost is slumping down mountainsides in the circumboreal north. Also, methane is being released through animal agriculture. That accounts for about 30% of the methane in the atmosphere right now. Methane is being released from the relatively shallow seafloor of the Arctic Ocean. The ice is disappearing from the Arctic Ocean. All of these are sufficient to cause rapid enough environmental change to cause human extinction. And there's a handful of them. There's not just one of them. There's a whole bunch of things going on at once.
And I think about, the Indian subcontinent. Everybody who lives in Bangladesh has got to go. And that's the food basket, the bread basket of that region. I mean, again, if nothing else were going on, just the rise in water levels, 130 million people have got to find another place to live. And hello, neighbors,
That's right. And it's not just across the pond. It's happening here, too. It's happening in the United States. There are climate refugees already in the United States. There are indigenous people in Alaska who have been forced to move their entire villages. I know personally several individuals who have moved because abrupt climate change is underway, and they no longer want to live in places that they see drying up, becoming too hot, heading very quickly towards lethal wet bulb temperatures. So I know several people who have moved as a result of these phenomena, as a result of their understanding of what's going on planet Earth.
Lethal wet bulb temperatures, just for a moment, that is.
Yeah, when the temperature locally is 95 degrees Fahrenheit and the relative humidity is 100%, or a combination of high temperature and high humidity. So at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it's considerably less than 100% relative humidity that causes our bodies, our homeothermic, warm-blooded mammal bodies, to not be able to dump the heat fast enough, to not be able to physiologically cool ourselves unless we're in water, unless we're taking a cold shower or in a cold body of water. We cannot dump heat fast enough. What that means is when you have those kinds of temperatures, even if you're standing in front of a fan, your body is not able to dump heat fast enough, so you experience organ failure. And that organ failure is symptomatic of those lethal wet bulb temperatures. When the organs fail, we die. So that's what lethal. That's what we're talking about.
I think it wasn't that long ago that 10,000, 20,000 people in Europe died. No doubt, exactly that. Couldn't deal with the heat.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That was 2003, and that was almost certainly as a result of France, which is where most of the deaths were, switching to nuclear power and turning off their coal-fired power plants. And once you switched off those coal-fired power plants, they lost the aerosol masking effect. It occurs locally at first, then regionally, then planetary-wide. And so they made that abrupt change to clean up their atmosphere, and the consequence was a whole bunch of people died. It's so paradoxical, and we're in the same situation at the planetary level. Civilization is a heat engine, no matter how we power it. That's based on the laws of thermodynamics. And yet, if we turn off the switch of civilization, the planet heats up so rapidly in such a short period of time that it almost conclusively, without doubt, would remove habitat for humans all over the planet in a matter of weeks or months.
Again, I'm speaking with Dr. Guy McPherson, and he'll be giving this presentation, Abrupt Climate Change, Finding Peace and Purpose in Urgent Times, tonight at 6:30 at the Martin Hansen Theater at the Great Lakes Visitor Center, Ashland. Presentation is free and open to the public. Tonight at 6:30, and then down at the Dreyfus University Center Theater at the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point, Wednesday evening at 6:30. The impact of climate change is being seen so much. We've been at home watching the birds. Had a wonderful time this summer watching the spring and summer, seeing the birds come and go, but we've also seen some die, and believe we're watching one of the corvids, blue jay, suffering likely from West Nile virus. Other birds, a couple of birds, some pine siskins died. We aren't quite sure why, but perhaps a fungus. But in any case, climate change is obvious in many, many ways. I mean, this West Nile virus is here because of the changing climate. Wood ticks, concerning so many people up here, all indicators of the shift in the climate, and those are just the little ones. When you're talking about the sixth extinction and humans among them. But your talk will include finding peace and purpose in these urgent times. You've said, have those conversations and be kind to your neighbors and make friends of.
You mentioned West Nile virus. There's also malaria and Lyme disease, and I was using these as examples 20 years.
Dengue fever.
Right, dengue fever. The list goes on. I was using these as examples 20 years ago in my classes of phenomena likely to occur as a result of increasing global average temperature, as a result of climate change. And here we are 20 years later. Gee, what a surprise. All of these things are underway, and far worse than almost anybody, certainly me, would have predicted at that time 20 years ago. And it's these little things that really have profound influence on our lives. People tell me all the time, it's just the little things going extinct. And I point out, little things like pollinators and filter feeders that keep our water clean. These little things actually matter and are responsible for our continued persistence on the planet. So we shouldn't disparage the little things. The little things actually matter and account for the big things. Were it not for the little things, the big things wouldn't be here. And the big things include, things like us.
People have talked about a tipping point, Guy, but we've passed that. So, finding peace and purpose in this urgent time.
Yeah, I encourage people to find their own meaning. People, it's kind of a joke that people go to college and ask, what is the meaning of life? And I addressed that question for 21 years in the classroom. For me, the meanings are personal. You need to find your meaning for your life. Why are you here? Are you here just to fill space? Are you here to party? Are you here to act as a hedonist? Some people are. Are you here to improve the lives of other people? Are you here to somehow improve your own life? Are you here to improve the planet for non-human organisms? Why are you here? Most people don't think about why they are here. Most people don't come up with a purpose for their own lives. And for me, my presentations offer an opportunity, since it's clear that our lives are short, and every day apparently we get closer to the end of our own lives. Our lives are short to begin with. Why would you not take advantage of that short life that we all have? Even if you live to be 100, your life is still going to seem relatively short. Why don't we take advantage of that to find some purpose, to find some meaning for our own lives, to figure out why we're here on planet Earth, even if it is for a short period of time, even if we only have a day or a week or a month, to do something with that time that you find meaningful, that allows you to look at the face in the mirror at the end of the day. I think that's valuable. And so that's been my focus for the last 5 years or so in my public presentations.
But as we face these urgent times, and even more urgent that we do so, about how to confront the problems that we face in view of the fact that some of them, if not the greatest of them, might be insoluble.
Well, there's that. Certainly at the level of society, at the level of the planet, we are in the midst of a predicament. It's not a problem. Global climate change is something that is almost certainly going to remove human life from Earth, and we're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction. That alone would do the trick. Never mind abrupt climate change that's underlying the sixth mass extinction.